Remember when you were told that Kansas landing this Panasonic EV plant, electric vehicle battery plant, was going to change the economy in this state for years and decades to come? Interestingly, this follows up very well in the story we just told you about, which is that Ford is cutting its price of its Lightning F-150 because, the marketplace is not there for these trucks. So we were told that, hey, we're going to bring Panasonic to Kansas, to DeSoto, and everything is going to be great. This is going to be a huge economic boom for the Johnson County area, for the eastern part of Kansas, and Republicans and Democrats were on board with this. And we sat here on the show and we wondered whether or not the subsidies were worth it. Well, it turns out they probably weren't. And it didn't take all that long to come to that realization. We now say hello and welcome on Dave Trabert of the Kansas Policy Institute on KCMO Talk Radio. Dave, you guys had this piece at the Sentinel, and the headline, Kansas taxpayers snookered again. Oklahoma lands bigger Panasonic battery plant with smaller price tag. What happened down there?
Well, surprise, Pete. First of all, it's good to have you, good to be on your show again this week. It was billed as a rush job. Legislators, it was kind of the Nancy Pelosi version. You have to vote for this before you find, and then you'll find out what's in it. Legislators were really pressured to vote for this massive billion-dollar subsidy, and saying that we have this big competition. We have to win this. It's going to be this transformational thing. Most of them didn't know what they were voting on. But the promise was, but if we get it, we're going to get 4,000 jobs. We're going to get this, we're going to get that. Turns out when they did get the deal and the contract is signed, there's no guarantees in it. None. That's
Wow.
The first time taxpayers get snookered. Now we find out that Panasonic is building as many as 5 plants in the United States, and they're putting one in Oklahoma. It was awfully suspicious that Oklahoma chose to come in with a smaller set of subsidies a year or so ago, and now it makes sense. There had to be some people who knew, look, we're going to get it, we're going to give them something, but we're going to get it, we're just not going to give them as much as Kansas handed over.
Yeah, so I remember this when this came down, in the last year or so, it was celebrated that Kansas beats out Oklahoma for this Panasonic battery plant for the electric vehicles. And it was perceived to be, and it was promoted as a huge win. We beat out Oklahoma. Well, what you're telling me and what you're telling the audience is that Oklahoma got essentially the same deal. They've got a battery plant from Panasonic coming their way, and there's a lot more strings attached to their deal down in the Tulsa area than there is up here in DeSoto.
Yeah, the deal with in Oklahoma requires them to make a minimum $3.5 billion investment in order to qualify for the subsidies. They have to hire at least 3,500 people to qualify for the subsidies. There's no guarantees. They could put, if there's 4,000, they could put 4,000 robots in that plant in Kansas. Now they won't, but there's just no guarantees. None. They're getting a $5 billion investment for $689 million. Kansas spent $829 million for an alleged $4 billion investment. And who knows what it's going to be. Now, the people on the fringe, it's going to be great for them. That's the deal with these subsidies. Somebody is going to benefit. First of all, there was Laura Kelly and David Toland got to go to the ribbon cutting, stand up on the stage, be the heroes. Look what we did, coincidentally, just in time for our reelection. And David Toland, the lieutenant governor, commerce director, is the real driving force behind this. He wants to be the next governor. This is setting the stage for him. He's a subsidy guy. That's the way he has run his career in the years before he got to commerce. He did this in Allen County, Kansas, down around Iola. Didn't work there, not working here. Kansas is the only state In the region that has lost private sector jobs this year, states all around us are growing. Kansas is falling behind because we refuse to deal with the negatives on our resume. We have extremely high taxes. We're the 8th worst taxing state for middle income people, the 3rd worst for retirees. We have the 9th highest sales tax rate, one of the highest income tax rates in the nation. It's there. It's obvious. The states that have lower tax burdens, even in small states where there's not big climate advantages, they're growing. We keep falling farther behind, and we keep doing the same things over and over again.
Dave Trabert, Kansas Policy Institute, is on KCMO Talk Radio. I agree with that assessment. It makes all the sense in the world. We're laying the foundation for David Tolan to succeed Laura Kelly as governor on the Democratic side of the aisle in Kansas. But there's a lot of Republicans who went along with this Panasonic deal and were convinced this was going to be a great economic boom, and we beat out Oklahoma, air quotes, and this is outstanding news for the state, regardless of what the tax giveaways were. And what about the blame there? I don't think that, the Republicans here that went along with this, because they were at the ribbon cuttings too, Dave, and they're getting let off scot-free.
Well, you're absolutely right, Pete. There were a lot of Republicans who voted for that. It was almost unanimous. Now, I will say that some Republicans didn't want to do it, but they were afraid that they would suffer if they didn't. There's always a price to pay. There's deals that are made or threats that are made. You got to play ball if you want to have positions of authority, and sometimes that happens. We know from having been in discussions with legislators during that time, Kansas Policy Institute was the only entity that stood up in the legislature and said, this is the wrong way to go. It won't work for all the reasons I just explained. Only ones. And so some of the legislators came and said, look, we know, I don't like this, but I got to go along with it. And it's you have to have principles. If subsidies are bad, then you don't do subsidies. If they haven't proven, you don't do them. But it's like the economist Thomas Sowell said, in order to understand politicians, you have to understand that most of them aren't trying to solve your problems. The first priority is to get elected. The second is to get reelected. And the third is kind of a distant thought. That's what we run up against a lot.
Yeah.
The elections drive everything. It was an election year.
So true. So true. So, Dave, what can we learn from this? We don't know what this plant here in DeSoto is going to look like. We're told what we think it will look like, but we don't really know what the outcome is going to be here on this. We know that this administration would rather give away tax dollars under the perception of economic victories instead of just creating an economic climate that's attractive to small and big business and growing the economy top to bottom. They don't really have a lot of interest in that. But what can the legislature learn from this after we find out Oklahoma's also getting a Panasonic plant in the wake of losing out on the first Panasonic plant to Kansas last year?
Well, at some point, we have to have enough legislators say, we need to understand why we're in our 5th consecutive decade of economic stagnation, falling farther and farther behind the national average growth in job creation and GDP activity. We have to start admitting what are our problems. You have to get those negatives off your resume. You have to look at, why would people give a pass? Why would people leave here? Why won't they come here? And there are some very simple things. The answer is usually in the mirror. It's something we're doing that we need to do differently. So we got close. We got very close to a massive tax reform, and I think that they are going to come back with that again, and we're going to fight the same battle with we're going to have the political squabbles with the pettiness that we had with some Republicans voting against it, not for policy reasons, but for payback. We're going to have Democrats who say we can't do this because we won't be able to balance our bills. We can give $1 billion to one company We're not worried about that. But it's all the political hypocrisy. You do the substitution game. You know, if you're opposed to this, then you should be opposed to that. Well, except in this case, it benefits. There's a reason, yada, yada, yada. We just have to start deciding, are we going to continue? Are we going to go into our sixth straight decade, or are we going to start turning around? And we cannot turn around and go in the right direction by doing the same things over and over again.
So true. Dave Trabert does a great job. Kansas Policy Institute. This needs to be getting more attention. Dave, great job as always. We appreciate you being here. We'll talk to you next week.
All right. Thanks, Pete.
Dave Trabert, Kansas Policy Institute. I mean, right there, it's a great – I mean, it's a sad story for Kansas, but it's a great story in just realizing that companies are going to do what they're going to do, and all they're trying to do in the meantime is fleece you, the taxpayer, and too many state governments and legislatures are willing to go along with it, to go to the ribbon cuttings. Such a disappointment. Meantime, coming up, Charles Barkley is trying to get people to buy Bud Light. We've got Mike Steinmeier, Independence Councilman, top of the hour. Tirade Tuesday. Start thinking about those at 8:30 here on KCMO Talk Radio.